So here we go, episode 2 of Nat Talks About It. And its title is So You Think You Found the One? Now What? So, what the title really speaks to is when we think we have found a person that we can connect with, someone that we think may be the one, and the things that we do to protect that. The topic really has been on my mind because after several years of talking to men and women in different stages of a relationship, married people, separated people, divorced people, single people, what I started noticing was that almost everyone had a story of a love that was, and it didn't materialize. And we all have those, right? There's nothing rare about that. But what grabs me every time I talk to different people is that a lot of times the person who lost the love or lost the experience is, in hindsight, kind of like, oh, that was stupid of me, or that was silly of her, or we should have done this better, right? And this talk is really for those of us that have had several loves, right? It's not really what we're going to talk about today. It doesn't really apply to new love, puppy love. It doesn't really apply to, when we were in our 20s or in our late teens, where we really didn't have experience taking care of a relationship. The relationship that we were in is the one that we were trying. This is really for those of us that, have been in 2, 3, 4 relationships that haven't worked, and those type of experiences. And it just always amazes me how we can identify a person for qualities that we would like for ourselves, for things that we would like to work on. But then when it comes to why didn't it work, a lot of times we're at a loss for words. We can't really explain it, right? So I'm hoping that with this talk today, we can get a conversation going. When you guys see the talk, make sure you like the talk, subscribe, leave a comment, whatever you feel inclined to. So I want to start by making sure that we know that if we're asking the question, so you think you found the one, now what, right? We have to make sure that we know that this is after the stage where you're screening people in and out, right? So if you're asking the question, is this the one, now what? You have already screened out or screened in, right? And what I mean by that is that because in talking about this with one of my friends, she made a very good comment. And she said, well, Nat, all of that starts with discernment, right? And she was right. It all starts with discernment. Discernment. You have to be able to tell your Peters from your Pauls, right? You have to be able to tell who comes into your life to plant the seed and who comes into your life just to eat the fruit. And part of dating is that, right? You meet people that might be wonderful, people that might be people that take you to a different level in your life, but it's not a lifetime person. It might not even be a seasoned person, right? So if you're thinking, so you think you found the one, now what? That means that you've already gone through that process. You've already discerned that this person is someone that either you can make it work with, you would like to make it work with, or you see it in the long term space. And I know that for some of us, that's only happened one time. And for others, we've had a couple experiences like that. So, what are the things? So, we think we found the one, we found this person that has the canvas for the relationship that we would like to keep, right? What does that mean? This person has traits, attributes, strengths, things that we value, either things that we see in ourselves and we want to duplicate, or things that we don't have and we want this person to bring in, right? Some of us like to be people that are like us, and some of us would like to be with people that complement us. I don't think either one is right or wrong. I think it's just about what you want in your person. But if you've decided that this person that you've met or this person that you've been getting to know could be this person in your life, could take this place, then what are the things that you will do, that I will do, to protect that experience, right? So some of the things that have gone on in the conversations that I've had with a few different people, and I have my notes in front of me, is that almost everyone has said that we make sacrifices, right? Almost everyone I spoke to, even if they use different words, every friends, men, women, people at work, everyone has the same experience, that a true connection will bring about sacrifices. Now, that could mean that the sacrifice comes after you've already made the decision that this person is the one, right? Or it can be before. It can be when you meet someone and you think, okay, I want to preserve this, so what do I do? And sacrifices can be cutting people off, right? There could be financial sacrifices, right? We all know that being in a relationship takes money, right? You spend money on dates, you spend money on spending time together, you spend money on trips, depending on what the norm is for your relationship. If it's a committed relationship, it's probably going to cost some amount of money. That's a sacrifice. That's a financial sacrifice, but it's a sacrifice. For some, it's going to take the sacrifice of goals, right? How many couples do we know where one person has said, I didn't go back to school so that he could go back to school and he could pursue that goal, or that she could work on her business and she could pursue that goal. There's couples like that. That's a different type of sacrifice. But regardless of the sacrifice, I think that both men and women that have experienced either once in a lifetime connection or a rare connection with someone can say that they made a sacrifice to preserve that. So that's one of the things. Another one of the things that has been often discussed about is vulnerability, right? Those of us that are serial daters, where if we're single, we date different people, we understand that not everyone that we date gets our vulnerability, right? You may have one person that you're more vulnerable with, and that might be the person that you screen in and the person that you think is the one, right? But I think that it's very difficult for your one to be someone that you're not vulnerable with. I don't think that true intimacy could ever happen if you don't allow yourself to be vulnerable and actually execute that, right? And what does that mean? That means that who you seem to be is actually who you are, that you're showing up as your authentic self. That you're not, if something brings certain emotions out of you, this person is the person that you should share it with. If something bothers you, that this person is the person that you're comfortable expressing that to, whether it's about them, about something else, or about a circumstance in your life. And what that means to me is just emotional safety, right? You have to be able to protect you have to be able to create, right? Because in a new relationship, you have nothing to protect when it comes to emotional safety because you don't have it. But you have to be able to create it and you have to be able to protect it, right? That means that communication, and I don't mean to sound cliche, oh, communication is key, but it is, right? If you and the person that you think is the one can't communicate openly and safely, regardless of what the topic is, then that's not a emotionally safe space. That's not going to foster the vulnerability that it takes to become closer to each other. So almost everyone talked about vulnerability. Another thing that is a little less involved, and that we say all the time, but I wonder how many of us really understand what it means. And it is asking before assuming, right? So, you see something, you hear something, you come across something, and you assume. You fly off the handle, right? And, our eyes and our ears can be deceiving. People say, I can't believe it until I see it. Sometimes you can see something and it look away. It's happened to me where I'm the person that was seen, right? And it was not at all what it looked like, right? And not just in romantic relationships. I mean, relationships with coworkers, friendships. So I haven't always been this way. I think that the maturity that I've gained in the last 5 years of my life has definitely gotten me to a place where no matter how hurtful what I see is, I do ask, right? And even if, and this is the thing, right? And a friend of mine and I talk about this all the time. Sometimes it's not someone's answer to the question, right? Because sometimes the answer is, I don't know why I did that. I'm not sure what I was thinking. Sometimes that's the answer. And that answer is not as problematic as your response to my question, right? So, for example, if you blow up because I asked you a question, if you get defensive, if you have an arrogant tone, right? How dare you ask me that? That type of thing. That's not a response that's going to elicit open communication. That's not going to foster any type of safety, really. So I think that asking before assuming, that definitely resonates with me when I've spoken about that with other people. Another thing that I think speaks to me, and a lot of people mentioned this in some way, was making changes, right? So you think you found the one, and that means that Timmy, Harry, and Richard before this person were not the one, right? Because those relationships have ended. So what changes will I make with this one so that the me that was with Richard, Timmy, and Harry does not show up now? Because we think that we end a relationship, right? We think we end a relationship, and it's really nice to think that it was all the other person's fault. I would love it if it was true, but it's not, right? We love to say, oh, but it wasn't mine, what do we say? Oh, she's crazy. He's controlling. What are some reasons? You can't talk to him. She's not affectionate, right? These are things that we throw out. But, when you get into your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, you begin to understand that even when you have toxic traits, even when you have flaws that show up in your relationship, my response plays a part in how this either breaks or strengthens my relationship. So no, unless in very egregious instances like abuse, right? Abuse is a very different. We're going to leave violence and abuse. We're going to leave that to the side. We're going to that deserves its own conversation. But unless we're talking about violence and abuse in a relationship, right? We can agree that any way that your partner shows up in a negative or a toxic way, you play a part in that, right? This is why we have things like enabling, right? This is why we have things like avoiding, right? How many of us avoid a circumstance, a situation, or a topic because we anticipate how our partner is going to respond, and we don't want to do that, right? So there's all these patterns that showed up with my previous partners. Those relationships ended. I think I found the one, but I didn't make a change in myself. I didn't analyze and say, okay, Nat, when you were with Richard, what didn't work? And how are you going to change it if you think you found the one? Because I can guarantee you that if I show up as the same Nat, more than likely, I'm going to get the same outcome. And we don't want to talk about that piece. We want to go 2 years single after a breakup and say things like, I was working on myself. And then we get with someone new and we prove that we didn't change anything about ourselves. All we did was allow time to pass. So, in order to protect the fact that you think you found the one, you're going to have to change aspects of yourself that showed up in your previous relationships. There's just no other way around it. And that's different for everybody, right? You know, for some people, it's working on their consistency. For other people, it's regulating your emotions. For other people, it's communication. It's different for everyone. For me, I'm 100% sure that it's communication. Communication for me is something that has to evolve every day and with everyone. But it's different for everybody. But if my communication skills in my next relationship are exactly like the skills that I had in my last, am I protecting anything? Probably not. And I think that also says something about how I feel about the new person. Because if I'm reluctant to change something that I know didn't work, that may mean that I don't value this new connection, or it's not a long-term one. Maybe I think more casually of it, right? So we also have to, and we're going to talk about that a little later. Some of the things that people have also talked about that I think are very valuable is that sometimes we have a strong connection with someone, and when conflict arises, we respond to this person as if they are the person that we were with before, which goes into the changes, right? That speaks to the changes that you make from relationship to relationship. Because if you do it right, every relationship should have changed you in some way if you do it right, right? But yeah, if I'm with Harry and conflict arises between me and Harry, and I respond to Harry the same way that I responded when I had conflict with Richard, and Harry has nothing to do with that, right? Harry wasn't there for any of that. Harry is not behaving in the same way, but for whatever reason I'm triggered and I respond to him how I did with Richard. That's not really protecting your relationship, right? So there's a way to get to know who your partner is. There's a way to know what their intention is. We also talked about, and I guess this goes to making sacrifices, connections to the past, right? A lot of us are in committed relationships, but we still have our little black book, right? And our little black book could be our Facebook, our Instagram, our phone. Our little black book could be a lot of things. But in our little black book, we have some type of contact with people in our past. And that, a lot of relationships have different standards for that. There's a lot of people that are friends with their exes. But I would challenge the conversation of what is the purpose of keeping in contact with your exes. I was with someone who was very much aware of what all his exes were up to, right? He knew where they lived, as in like, different states and things like that. He knew what job they had. He knew all these things. And, that was a very uncomfortable thing for me because, having a full life where you have family and friends and work, what is going on that you have the time and you have the opportunity to keep abreast of what your exes are doing, right? There's this thread between you and the people you've been with that has not been severed, right? And that's a sacrifice that you make when you think you found the one, right? You're forsaking all others. And there's probably a lot of different topics we can hit on with that subject. I personally, at this stage of my life, I feel very passionate about that. I don't believe in connections to people that you have been with. I just don't see the purpose. So those were some of the things that we do to protect what we have. And I think that if we wanted to summarize the whole thing, we could say it's basically forsaking anything that puts it at risk. That's what it is. If you think you found the one and you are committed to trying to make it work, you forsake anything or anyone that puts it at risk. That's it. So we should talk about why is it important to protect it? Why do we want to protect these relationships? And I think I mentioned it a few times before. We value it. You don't protect what you don't value. Those of us that have kids, why do we protect our kids, right? We put value in that relationship, in that life, in that love. It's not just because it's expected. That's not, we say that, right, when we're upset, but that's not true. You protect, same thing with pets. Those of us that have pets that we love, why do you protect your pet? You value that. It's the same thing with a relationship, right? I think that's the biggest and the best reason to protect something, because you value it. A lot of times, I think that what also comes into play is the hopes that we have in this, right? Particularly when you have like decades of dating or decades of relationships that haven't worked, you kind of get tired, right? And you meet someone and it's month 4, month 5, and you're full of hope, right? I hope this works. So within that hope, you put the protection. Also, those of us that have had certain experiences in previous relationships, we understand that what we're looking at, what's in front of us, is different than what we've had. And that's a big one, right? This feels different. It looks different. It feels different. I'm different. So I want it to be different. And that's also a great reason to protect it. And also we want it. We want it. We want this good thing that's in front of us. But I think that the disconnect sometimes between why we want it and what we do to protect it is that we don't always understand that the protection is the price that you pay to keep it, right? Little action, little effort, little appreciation. And when we talk about the things we do in a relationship, right? We often talk about the single you not showing up in the committed you, right? And we talk about, cooking and cleaning if you're living with somebody, cooking and cleaning, paying, working with each other's goals. We talk about those things. Those are the typical relationship things, depending on the stage of where your relationship is, right? Paying for dates, saving money together, making a plan to either live together, get married. We talk about all those things. But this other interpersonal stuff that we have, that's also protection. That's also protection. And I think that, when you get that piece right, when you get that type of protection right, all these other things come a lot easier. And I think that what we're willing to do to protect a connection is directly proportional to how much we appreciate it. So sometimes, when we talk about, there's a topic that I'm going to cover on change. And sometimes until we hit the rock bottom, we don't really appreciate things. And that happens in relationships. Until you've had a very bad relationship or a relationship that you don't think speaks to where you're going in life, you don't appreciate the one that's in front of you that could be the one. And when you can tell the difference, again, discernment, right? Being able to discern what's what is so powerful. When you know the difference, you can show up as the person that you think will be able to protect that, right? So you want this person to be the one because you've picked out these traits. You figured out how you're not going to show up in this relationship. Why do our signals get crossed? If we know we have to protect it, right? And we want it, then what goes wrong? I think that this is a space where we can talk about self-sabotage. It's sad, but a lot of times the people we choose and how we choose to show up for these people is a reflection of how we feel about ourselves. And sometimes as you meet someone and that starts to align, you also get scared, right? It's a scary thing. It's a scary thing. I was speaking to a friend of mine and we were talking about a situation, and I was explaining to my friend that, when I met this particular person, I got sad because I knew that the minute it started was going to be a day closer to the end, right? Because if you and I believe that everything comes to an end and nothing is forever, right? As strong as a connection might be, eventually it'll end in some way. You know what it is for us dog owners? It's like going to buy a dog, right? You go to buy a dog and you get him as a puppy and you love him and he's your best friend. And you begin to understand that one day this dog is not going to be here. And you're like, oh, this is going to hurt. So sometimes when we feel that, some of us, some type of personalities, we self-sabotage, right? We make it not work, or we tell ourselves that it's not going to work, because the sooner that it's over, the less painful it'll be. So I think sometimes there's some self-sabotage. Sometimes I think there's also a piece of we don't have experience with what we're looking at, right? So if you're coming from a relationship where the table was bare, right? The other person didn't put in the work that you think you deserved, right? Or that you feel you were putting in. That table was bare. Now you're looking at this person with so much capacity, so much potential. How are you going to take care of it? How are you going to protect it? You've been with this other person for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and you were used to that. What makes me or you think that you're going to go into something new, different, where there is potential and capacity, and you're going to be able to take care of it? That's probably going to require a lot of endings to those patterns, what we talked about in the beginning, right? A lot of change. But it's also going to require a lot of self-reflection, right? If my ego steps in and my ego is like, I'm going to show up with Harry the same I showed up with Richard, because I am who I am and no one's going to change me. Let's let that sit for a minute, right? That's what a lot of us think. I'm not changing for anyone, right? And we tell ourselves that lie. I'm not changing for anyone. And we don't change. And then what happens? The connection ends, right? And it may not happen immediately, but with time, it'll end. It'll end with people knowing why it ended, or it will end just because. So that is pretty much most of what I wanted to discuss. The last point that I wanted to share was that many years ago, I had an intimate relationship with somebody that made a very big impact in my life. And he was very much into fitness, right? And at that time, he was working with me, getting into the gym, working out and fitness. And I'll never forget, there were things that he would teach me and I would get frustrated because they were uncomfortable on my body. They were physically uncomfortable. I didn't like how it felt. My legs hurt, my arms hurt. I was like, no, the gym is not for me. And he said, I'll never forget this. He would say something to me every time he saw me kind of lose steam. And he would say, Nat, you got to do the reps. You got to do the reps, babe. You got to put in the reps. All the time he would say that to me. And it got so much a part of our conversations during that period of time that, and I ended up being with him for many years. But what ended up happening was that we ended up using that every time something got difficult. If he or I were going through a crisis at work or going through a rough spot at work, if we were struggling with our families, with our parents, with our siblings, with friends, whatever, and we would process things out and we would say, babe, you got to do the reps. You got to put in the reps. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. If you think you found the one, you have to put in the reps. That's it. There's no easy way about it. And it might look different for each of us, but you have to put in the reps. Put in the reps and it should be worth it. So as some of the feedback that I've gotten through some of these talks are that a lot of you want to know what we're talking about next. So our next topic is going to be flaws and red flags. So I think that's going to be a fun one. It's probably going to be a very necessary one for a lot of us. So I'm looking forward to it. So if you're up to it, let's talk about it. See you next time. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit like, leave a comment, anything you're inclined to do. I appreciate you.